They laughed when they fired me. They stopped laughing when this happened. They want new blood for the product rebrand, she said casually, as if she were discussing the weather, not gutting my career. My name is Evan Maddox, 42 years old, lead innovation designer at Summitage Gear in Boulder, Colorado, or at least I had been, until that morning when Celeste Barron, our polished new VP of Creative, summoned me into her glass-walled office. Lauren, from HR, was already there, her laptop open like a shield between us. I'd sensed it creeping closer for months, the subtle sidelining, the unexplained meeting exclusions. Celeste came from a glamorous background in luxury branding, and from the moment she arrived, it was clear, rugged authenticity, the foundation of Summitage's identity, was no longer in vogue. Your vision's outdated, she added with a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. We need designs that speak to the Instagram generation. The words tasted like ash. I'd built Summitage's flagship product lines, the Pioneer Series packs, the Vanguard outerwear gear that had won awards not for looking good on a runway, but for surviving lives in the backcountry. I didn't design for photo shoots. I designed for survival. Celeste slid the termination packet across her pristine oak desk. Her nails were painted a gleaming scarlet, a color that had never scraped against granite or frozen against an ice axe. I glanced at the papers. 3 months severance, health coverage through the end of the year, a soft landing, corporate mercy. I kept my face a mask, nodded once, and rose. 7 years of blood, sweat, and sleepless nights reduced to a polite dismissal before lunch. I packed up my drafting tools, the prototypes gathering dust in my office, and walked out under the hollow stares of co-workers too afraid to meet my eyes. Celeste had no idea. She thought she'd exiled me, but what she didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this day for months, sketching in secret, building a private portfolio of gear designs Summitage had called too ambitious, or misaligned with brand image, ideas they were too blind to recognize. As I pulled away from the parking garage, my phone vibrated on the passenger seat. A text from Brody, head of product testing. They just made the biggest mistake in company history. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, emotions boiling just under the surface. My story began not in boardrooms but in sawdust and oil stains. I grew up in a cabin outside Crestwood, Montana, helping my grandfather handcraft timber kayaks and leather mountaineering boots. There, I learned the first principle of real design. Form follows need. Not aesthetics, not trends. Need. You shaped the material around the job it had to perform, nothing more, nothing less. I carried that ethos into design school, then into my early career. When I joined Summitage 7 years ago, they were hemorrhaging market share to flashier brands. Their equipment was tough but clumsy relics of a bygone era. Within 2 years, I'd gutted their product line, rebuilt it from the ground up. The result? Sales tripled. Summitage became synonymous with functional innovation. Back then, the CEO, Ron Helms, understood. He was a gearhead himself, someone who'd spent weekends testing prototypes in the Rockies. Save their lives first, he'd said. Impress them second. Under Ron, we had been unstoppable. But Ron retired, and with him went the soul of the company. In came Marta Langston, fresh from the luxury goods world, all silk scarves and keynote speeches. Her first move, hiring Celeste Barron, a branding genius from a high-end lifestyle magazine. The writing had been on the wall ever since. 3 months ago, I submitted a full concept suite for a new high-performance, adaptable equipment line, tents that shifted with wind pressure, jackets that regulated core temperature through passive materials instead of battery packs, a revolution in field technology. Celeste called it uninspired. A week later, I watched in disbelief as she presented an eerily similar set of new concepts developed. She claimed by Hellen, her star recruit fresh out of a fashion startup in San Francisco. I saw the betrayal then, plain as day. They weren't rejecting innovation. They were rejecting me. That night, over cheap whiskey and a bitter heart, I called an old friend, Harlan Sutter, now the lead developer at Titan Ridge, Summitage's fiercest competitor. When I laid out the situation, Harlan laughed grimly. You sitting on a non-compete? Nope, I replied. Ron thought they were immoral. There was a pause, then. Interesting, real interesting. When I arrived home that afternoon, officially unemployed, I didn't turn on the TV or crack a beer. I unrolled the thick portfolios hidden beneath my drafting table. 12 complete gear collections, each designed for a different hostile environment. Each solving real-world problems climbers and explorers faced every day. Ideas to practical, to daring for the glossy new summitage. Rain lashed against the windows as I flipped through page after page. A silent testament to all the work they'd dismissed, to the vision they'd buried under their obsession with market trends. In that moment, I realized summitage wasn't my home anymore, but my designs still had a future, maybe an even bigger one than I dared imagine. And as the storm howled outside, I started to plot my next move. The following morning, the sun broke through the gray clouds, casting my cluttered apartment in harsh light. I barely slept, my mind raced all night, mapping ideas, threats, opportunities. At 9:12 a.m., my phone rang. It was Savannah Reed, creative director at Titan Ridge. Harlan must have wasted no time. Harlan says you're the real mind behind Summitage's success, she said briskly. Skipping pleasantries, we're finalizing our winter and spring launches. I'm interested. What have you got? My heart pounded. This wasn't just a lifeline. It was a once-in-a-career opportunity. I glanced at the sprawling sketches, each more refined, more daring than anything the sanitized Summitage portfolio would ever approve. I can send over some concepts today, I replied, forcing calm into my voice. Do it, Savannah said. If they're as good as Harlan claims, we'll set a meeting within 24 hours. I hung up, adrenaline singing through my veins. No time for fear. No time for nostalgia. This was war. I spent the next 8 hours like a man possessed, refining, tweaking, reworking presentations, not the designs themselves, but how they were framed. I knew what Savannah needed to see: innovation, scalability, a clean narrative that showed Titan Ridge could seize the market Summitage was about to fumble. At 11:58 p.m., I hit send. 17 megabytes of sketches, technical notes, and production-ready specs. I collapsed on the couch, fully clothed, my mind still racing as sleep overtook me. The next morning, Savannah's reply was waiting in my inbox. 10 a.m. at Titan Ridge HQ. Bring your contract terms. Be ready to talk launch timelines. My heart kicked into overdrive. This was happening. I dressed deliberately, no suits, no corporate pretense. Canvas jacket, rugged boots, field gear. I wanted to remind everyone exactly who I was. A designer who lived the life his products were built for. At Titan Ridge's headquarters, a converted industrial loft brimming with fabric samples and weathered climbing gear, a young assistant ushered me upstairs. Savannah's office was the polar opposite of Celeste's sterile temple, cluttered, chaotic, real. Half-finished prototypes littered the work tables. Scuffed boots and carabiners hung from wall hooks. She stood by a corkboard peppered with printouts. My designs. She didn't smile, didn't waste words. These solve problems my engineers have been stuck on for 2 years, she said, tapping a finger against the sketch of the modular weatherproof system. Especially this one. How soon can you start? Immediately, I said without hesitation. Savannah nodded once. Good, we're putting your gear into full production. Fast, very fast. A surge of exhilaration nearly bowled me over. This wasn't just a new job. This was a second chance at everything Summitage had thrown away, and I wasn't going to waste it. A week later, while deep in development meetings at Titan Ridge, my phone buzzed again. The caller ID made my stomach tighten. Peter Hellen, Summitage's production manager. We'd fought side by side for years on manufacturability challenges. A good man, trapped in a bad system. I let it go to voicemail. 30 minutes later, curiosity got the better of me. I stepped outside into the bright Colorado morning and listened. Peter's voice was low, urgent. Evan, listen. Things are falling apart here. Kellen's designs, they're disasters. The prototypes are overweight. Materials are failing stress tests. We're 6 months behind and Celeste is blaming you. A beat of silence. She's telling the board you deliberately left the documentation a mess to sabotage the transition. You need to watch your back, man. For a moment, the blue sky seemed to darken above me. Accusations of sabotage? This wasn't incompetence anymore. This was a full-scale character assassination. Against my better judgment, I fired off a polite email to Marta Langston, Summitage's CEO, requesting a meeting to clarify any misunderstandings regarding my handover process. She agreed. Coffee shop, neutral ground, public space. The next morning, I arrived early, positioning myself near the door. Marta swept in 10 minutes late, her tailored coat snapping in the wind. She didn't even sit down before speaking. "Evan, we don't want this to escalate. The outdoor gear industry is tight-knit. Reputations are fragile. I suggest you avoid further misunderstandings." The message was clear. Stay quiet, stay gone, or we'll bury you. I met her cold gaze without blinking. "Of course," I said lightly. I'd hate for Summitage to invest millions manufacturing products that were never designed to survive real use. Her jaw tightened. We both knew exactly which products I meant. When she left, my phone buzzed again. A text from Savannah. "Contracts are finalized. Your modular series is going to market. Name your launch bonus." I stared at the screen, the blood pounding in my ears. They thought they could erase me. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The storm broke 2 days later. I was in Titan Ridge's prototype lab, knee-deep in fabric swatches and waterproof seam tests, when Savannah marched in, a thin envelope in one hand. She tossed it onto the worktable. "You've been served," she said grimly. Inside, a carefully worded letter from Summitage's corporate counsel, demanding clarification regarding the suspicious overlap between my past work and Titan Ridge's upcoming collection. They danced around accusations of intellectual property theft, but the intent was crystal clear. They were trying to scare me, to paralyze Titan Ridge's momentum before we could launch, to bury me in legal threats before the truth could surface. I met Savannah's gaze across the mess of blueprints. Should I respond? She smiled thinly. "You won't, our lawyers will." Later that night, Titan Ridge's legal team drafted a reply that could have doubled as a declaration of war. We possess extensive records documenting Mr. Maddox's original designs, submitted and rejected by Summitage. Should you wish to pursue litigation, we would be eager to compare development timelines in court. We are fully prepared to defend Mr. Maddox's work and Titan Ridge's right to develop independently conceived products. The email went out at midnight. By dawn, silence. No further calls. No new letters. Summitage blinked first. 3 days later, I got a whisper through the grapevine. Peter Hellen called again, his voice low and strained. "Whatever you sent them scared the hell out of Celeste. She's been locked in meetings with legal for 2 days. Word is, the board's asking uncomfortable questions about design timelines." "Good," I said simply. "Bad for you too," Peter warned. "She's not the type to lose gracefully. Watch your back, Evan." "Seriously." I thanked him and hung up, my mind churning. The battle wasn't over. Not even close. A few more days passed. I buried myself in Titan Ridge's accelerated timeline. We moved at breakneck speed, faster than I thought possible. Prototypes were tested, failures scrapped, improvements implemented on the fly. We worked like a team possessed. And through it all, Savannah stood firm beside me. "The market won't wait for permission," she said one night as we finalized the final specs for the modular weatherproof system. "Let Summitage chase our dust." Then, just when I thought the worst had passed, another bomb dropped. Harlan called me, urgency sharpening every word. "You need to see this." We met at a battered diner halfway between our offices, the kind of place with chipped mugs and burnt coffee. Harlan slid a tablet across the table. On the screen, Summitage's leaked internal marketing brief for their upcoming fall launch. And there they were, my designs, my exact designs. Slightly rebranded, sure new names, polished graphics but unmistakable. The modular backpack system, the adaptive insulation jacket, the ergonomic trekking gear, all the work they'd rejected months ago, now proudly paraded as the centerpiece of their new Elevation series. With Kellen's name splashed across the materials as lead designer, my stomach twisted in slow, furious knots. I scrolled through mock-ups, materials lists, ad copy filled with buzzwords Celeste barely understood. They weren't just using my ideas. They were trying to erase me from my own legacy and launch it a month after Titan Ridge's Summit series. Harlan leaned forward, voice low. "Here's the kicker. Savannah just got approval to move our launch up by 3 weeks. Your series hits shelves in August. I blinked. 3 weeks before they can even ship a single elevation product. He nodded grimly. They'll be chasing your shadow. If you say yes, production starts Monday. No turning back after that. I didn't hesitate. I met his gaze and said the only thing there was to say. Let's crush them. That night, back at my apartment, I signed the revised contract. It wasn't just a salary anymore. It included royalties per unit sold, full creative control over my designs, and top billing in all marketing materials. Titan Ridge wasn't just giving me a job. They were giving me the chance to finally see my vision through without compromise, without betrayal, without cowardice. As I hit send on the final acceptance email, a new message pinged into my personal inbox from an unfamiliar address. Subject line: Consulting Opportunity, Summitage. I clicked it open. The email was from Celeste herself. Short, smooth, fake-friendly. Evan, hope you're well. We'd love to explore a consulting relationship for our upcoming product expansion. Your expertise would be invaluable during this critical time. Let's discuss. I stared at the screen, stunned by the sheer audacity. A slow, bitter laugh escaped my throat. I didn't bother replying. I just deleted it. Some bridges aren't just burned. Some are reduced to ashes and scattered on the wind. The next morning, I barely had time to grab a cup of coffee before my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Savannah herself. Get down to HQ, she said, no greeting, her voice electric with energy. Now, bring everything you've got. Within 30 minutes, I stood in the main conference room at Titan Ridge, facing down the full leadership team. On the massive digital screen behind Savannah, my designs blazed in brilliant resolution. The modular pack, the temperature-adaptive jacket, the integrated survival system, 6 core products that would redefine outdoor performance and drive a stake right through Summitage's carefully manufactured narrative. Savannah wasted no time. We're launching under the banner of the Summit series, she announced. Evan's designs, Evan's name, we're putting it all out front. A ripple of excitement ran around the room. She pointed at the timeline. First production run, 4 weeks. Initial retailer shipments, 6 weeks. Full-scale marketing blast, 7 weeks. The speed was mind-blowing, risky, terrifying, and absolutely necessary. Savannah turned to me. We need you in the factory, every day, whatever it takes. You'll have full authority over design integrity. I didn't hesitate. Whatever it takes, I agreed. The following month was a blur. I all but lived inside Titan Ridge's manufacturing facility, a sprawling, half-finished labyrinth of prototype gear, 3D printers, and waterproofing vats. I bunked in a tiny back office on a battered cot, pulling 16-hour shifts alongside the exhausted but exhilarated production team. There were hurdles, of course. The modular systems were far more complex than anything Titan Ridge had ever built. Seam failures, material inconsistencies, unexpected flex issues in extreme cold simulations. But we solved them, one brutal day at a time. I earned the team's respect not because of my title, but because I was there hands dirty, sleeves rolled up, problem solving in real time. Not issuing orders from a clean office, not blaming others when the specs didn't pan out. Leadership by doing, the only kind that mattered. Halfway through production, Savannah pulled me aside. Got another little surprise for you, she said, handing me a tablet. On the screen was a rough cut of Titan Ridge's upcoming Summit Series commercial. It didn't feature models posing against perfect backdrops. It showed real climbers battered, sweating, pushing through brutal conditions, relying on gear that didn't just look good, but kept them alive. Over grainy footage of icy ridgelines and treacherous river crossings, my name appeared in bold white text. Designed by Evan Maddox. I swallowed hard, emotions catching me off guard. 7 years at Summitage, and they'd buried my contributions under layers of polished marketing bullshit. Now, finally, the world would know. Savannah clapped me on the shoulder. Time to show them what real design looks like. Meanwhile, the whispers started spreading. Small outdoor retailers, the backbone of the industry, began buzzing about the Summit series. After a few pre-value samples leaked, early rave IUs from independent testers praised the innovations, the rugged reliability, The practical genius of the modular systems. Forums exploded with speculation. Titan Ridge, the scrappy underdog, was about to gut Summitage's fall campaign before it even launched. But Summitage wasn't going down without a fight. One night, after a marathon assembly line shift, I checked my phone and found a new email. From Marta Langston. No greetings, no preamble, just one line. We need to discuss your current activities immediately. Your professional future depends on it. A threat, thinly veiled. This time, I didn't even bother to respond. I simply forwarded the email to Titan Ridge's legal team. They replied within hours, firing back a blistering cease and desist warning against any further attempts at professional intimidation. And then the final blow landed. Harlan slid into the lab one evening, grinning like a wolf. "You're going to want to see this," he said. On his tablet, leaked internal emails from Summitage. Documents showing Celeste scrambling, panicking, trying to revise their Elevation Series marketing strategy. After glimpses of the Summit Series began circulating, they knew they were beaten before they even launched. But they couldn't pull out without exposing themselves. They were trapped, forced to march forward with stolen, second-rate copies of the original's copies everyone now knew I had designed. At 8 a.m. that night, alone in the factory under buzzing fluorescent lights, I stood by the first completed shipment of Summit Series gear, a full shipment, ready to roll out to stores nationwide. I ran a hand over the rugged stitching of the modular pack, the culmination of a lifetime's work. A philosophy born from that dusty old workbench in Crestwood. Form follows need, my grandfather had said. Summitage forgot. Titan Ridge remembered. And now finally so would the world. August 10th, the day everything changed. The Summit Series launch wasn't subtle. It hit the outdoor gear industry like a meteor strike. Titan Ridge unleashed a blitzkrieg marketing campaign. Authentic field footage, side-by-side demos showing the gear outperforming every major competitor including Summitage. Savannah had orchestrated it with surgical precision. Billboards went up in Denver, Seattle, and Portland. Gear forums were flooded with early user reviews overwhelmingly glowing. Specialized outdoor magazines received pre-release samples, and within hours, articles exploded across social media. Revolutionary modular outdoor systems redefine the market. Finally, real innovation beyond empty branding. Designed by Evan Maddox, formerly of Summitage. Every headline drove the dagger deeper. And best of all, retailers burned too many times by Summitage's empty promises lined up behind us. Titan Ridge's website crashed twice from the traffic surge. Orders poured in faster than we could process them. I spent the day not at a party, not giving speeches, but quietly, methodically walking the production floor, checking stitches, testing seals, talking to the workers who had busted their backs to make this happen. They deserved it as much as I did. By mid-afternoon, Savannah cornered me near the loading docks, her smile razor-sharp. "Congratulations," she said, handing me a printout. I glanced down. First day orders, triple projections. She tapped the page. "Your royalties are going to make you a rich man, Maddox." I shrugged. "I didn't do this for the money." "No," she said, studying me. "You did it because they forgot who you were." Meanwhile, across town, Summitage burned. Their planned Elevation Series launch, scheduled for late September, was now a dead product walking. Retailers who had once slavishly courted them were now slashing their pre-order numbers, scrambling to realign with Titan Ridge. Worse, word leaked through Peter Holland and a dozen other industry insiders that the Elevation prototypes were catastrophes. Packs 30 from term heavier than advertised. Jackets that failed thermal regulation tests. Accessories that snapped under field testing. Summitage tried to spin it, blaming production challenges and material supply chain issues. But no one believed them. The rot was too deep, the truth too obvious. And then came the final twist of the knife. 3 days after our launch, Outside Magazine, the most respected voice in the outdoor world, published an investigative expose titled, "Separated at Birth, the Curious Case of Two Identical Gear Collections." It laid everything bare. Timeline comparisons, archive design submissions, interviews with anonymous insiders. They didn't outright accuse Summitage of theft, but the implication was undeniable. The designs behind Titan Ridge's Summit series were originally developed internally at Summitage by Evan Maddox, the article read. Sources allege that Summitage rejected these innovations, only to repurpose similar concepts months later under different leadership. Forums exploded overnight. Consumers weren't just angry, they were furious. Outdoor enthusiasts value loyalty, authenticity, survival. Summitage had betrayed all three. The next day, my phone rang. Caller ID, Marta Langston. I stared at it for a long moment. Then against my better judgment I picked up. Her voice was strained, brittle. Evan, this is unacceptable, she began without greeting. You've deliberately undermined Summitage's standing in the market. You've compromised our brand equity. There will be consequences. I let her rant. When she finally paused, I answered quietly. I submitted those designs to your company. I followed every protocol. You rejected them. You rebranded them without my name. Silence. Then, acid in her voice. We may still pursue legal action. I smiled grimly. You're welcome to try. Titan Ridge has every document, every timestamp, every rejected email. Your Elevation series wouldn't survive e-discovery. More silence. Then she said, almost a whisper, you should have stayed. Fought harder. I thought of that day in the glass-walled office. Celis' manicured hand sliding my termination papers across the table like a death sentence. I thought of the months spent sketching alone at my drafting table, watching everything I'd built disintegrate. I thought of the thousands of workers now building Summit Series gear under a company that actually valued them. I thought of the sunrise hike on the ridge where I realized my fight wasn't there anymore. I wasn't silent because I was beaten. I had walked away because I refused to fight for people who never deserved my loyalty. I answered softly, some battles aren't worth fighting, Marta. And I hung up. That evening, Savannah hosted a private dinner at a quiet lodge in the foothills. The entire Titan Ridge leadership team was there. Harlan, Diane, our lead production engineer, Savannah's second in command, a grizzled marketing director named Natte who had spent 20 years in the trenches. There were no speeches, no awards, no big dramatic moments, just drinks, good food, and the quiet, exhausted satisfaction of people who had pulled off the impossible together. Savannah raised her glass toward me. To Evan, she said simply, for reminding us all why the right fight matters. I lifted my glass, feeling the heat of pride burn deep in my chest. Not revenge, not spite, not even vindication, just something purer. Something earned, freedom, respect, and a future built on my own terms. In the weeks that followed, the consequences of the Summit Series launch rippled outward like shockwaves through the industry. Summitage's reputation imploded almost overnight. Retailers canceled pre-orders for the Elevation series en masse after the Outside magazine expose. Gear review sites piled on. Independent field testers filmed brutal side-by-side comparisons. Titan Ridge's Summit gear surviving flash storms and freezing nights. Summitage's Elevation gear ripping, leaking, and failing. Even longtime Summitage loyalists, serious outdoor veterans, began abandoning the brand publicly, calling for leadership changes and demanding accountability. By September, Summitage's stock price had dropped nearly 11 %. Industry whispers turned into open conversations. Marta Langston's days were numbered. Celeste Barron's reputation was radioactive. They weren't just bleeding revenue. They were bleeding trust, the one thing no amount of marketing could buy back. Meanwhile, Titan Ridge thrived. Summit Series sales shattered every internal record. Retailers couldn't stock shelves fast enough. The royalties flowing into my account were staggering, more than I'd earned in 7 years at Summitage, multiplied many times over. But the real reward wasn't financial. It was creative freedom. Savannah formally promoted me to Director of Product Innovation at Titan Ridge, granting me my own full team, 6 hand-picked designers to field engineers, and a direct line to manufacturing. And Harlan, my oldest ally, transferred departments to work directly with me, overseeing materials and production quality. Together, we weren't just planning the next season's releases. We were building an empire. One cold October morning, an unexpected package arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside, a heavy envelope and a simple handwritten note. It read, Some things belong to those who built them. P. Hellen. Inside the envelope, all my original Summitage sketchbooks, hundreds of pages spanning years full of designs, prototypes, field notes, sketches annotated with muddy fingerprints from real climbs and storms. My heart twisted as I flipped through the worn pages. These weren't just old ideas. They were memories, the history of a man who had once believed he could change a company. From the inside, Peter must have risked everything to get them back to me. I owed him more than a thank you. I owed him a future worth beliving. Later that evening, while reviewing the old sketches, I stopped on one particular design. A modular winter survival system, tent, gear, clothing, emergency components all built to work together in extreme environments. An idea I'd never gotten to pitch. An idea Summitage never even knew about. An idea that, in the right hands, could change the outdoor industry forever. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with Savannah. When I laid out the concept, rough, messy, but full of potential, her eyes lit up. "This," she said simply, "is what puts us 5 years ahead of anyone else." She didn't even hesitate. Greenlit. Full development budget. Immediate prototyping. Meanwhile, back at Summitage, the rot finally reached the surface. In November, Peter called again, his voice strangely gleeful. "Marta's stepping down. Personal reasons, officially. Celis transitioning into new opportunities. Translation, they're out." He laughed. "Word is the board finally saw the numbers and the writing on the wall. You broke them, Evan. You did what nobody else could." I didn't gloat. Not really. I just felt a deep, solid finality settle inside my chest. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure. I wasn't the failure they'd once tried to exile. I was the future they couldn't keep up with. In December, I traveled to a major industry conference in Denver, Titan Ridge's first real public reintroduction to the outdoor world. The Summit Series gear headlined the show. Journalists, retailers, adventurers, they crowded Titan Ridge's booth, peppering our team with questions, snapping photos of the modular systems, demanding early orders. The buzz was electric, and amid the crowds, standing awkwardly by the far wall, drink in hand, I spotted a familiar figure. Celeste Barron. She looked diminished, thinner, hollow-eyed behind a designer scarf. As I moved past her, she intercepted me, a hand lightly on my arm. "Congratulations," she said, her voice polished but brittle. "You've made quite the comeback." I smiled politely. "Wasn't a comeback," I said. "Was a course correction." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "You could have stayed. You could have fought for your designs." I shook my head slowly. "You never wanted a fight. You wanted obedience." The words landed harder than I expected. Her shoulders sagged slightly, just for a moment. "The board offered me a consulting contract," she said, almost bitterly, "to help fix the brand. I turned it down." I nodded. "Smart." Celeste glanced at the bustling Titan Ridge booth, the photographers, the lines of eager retailers, then back at me. "You built something better," she said, soft and almost disbelieving. I met her gaze. "No," I said. "I finally built it somewhere that deserved it." And with that, I walked away. Outside the conference center, snow was starting to fall thick, soft flakes spinning lazily in the gray light. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, the prototype modular winter coat that had started as a rejected sketch on a lonely drafting table. And I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I'd finally understood. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving someone wrong. It's finding the place you were meant to be all along and thriving so brightly they can never touch you again. January arrived like a thunderclap. In the mountains, the snows deepened, carving the landscape into hard, merciless beauty. And inside Titan Ridge's workshop, we prepared to unleash something the outdoor industry had never seen. The Apex survival system, the concept born from those old sketchbooks, was no longer an idea scribbled in haste. It was real, and it was magnificent. The Apex line wasn't just modular. It was adaptive, a tent that reconfigured itself depending on wind pressure and snow load, a jacket that adjusted insulation levels automatically based on internal core temperature, footwear that stiffened or flexed, depending on terrain conditions detected by embedded microsensors. Every piece worked independently and synergized perfectly as a system. A survival ecosystem, built for Everest expeditions, built for Arctic crossings, built for the world's harshest places and the people who dared to enter them. Savannah stood with me on the factory floor one evening, surveying the prototypes laid out under bright lights. "You realize," she said, "if we pull this off, we're not just leading the market, we're redefining it." I nodded, feeling the gravity of it settle into my bones. This wasn't about outpacing Summitage anymore. It was about something bigger, changing what outdoor gear could be, what it should be. Meanwhile, Summitage stumbled from one disaster to the next. Their hastily rebranded Elevation series, already under suspicion, hit shelves in limited quantities. Crippled by production delays and angry distributors, the early rave IUs were merciless. Fragile zippers that jammed in cold conditions, waterproof membranes that failed after a single rainstorm, modular components that simply didn't fit together. Retailers slashed prices within weeks to clear the stock. Outdoor forums turned savage. Photos of shredded Elevation packs and soaked-through jackets went viral. The Elevation fail became a trending hashtag. By February, Summitage's stock had plummeted 18%. The board ousted the interim CEO. Multiple lawsuits brewed in the background: class action suits from distributors, breach of contract suits from suppliers. They weren't just bleeding out, they were dying. Peter Holland kept me informed with quiet satisfaction. One evening, he texted simply, "Celeste is out. Board dissolved her consulting contract. Rumor is they're prepping for a full asset sell-off within 6 months." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling not triumph, not even relief, just a strange, clean emptiness. The empire I'd once helped build was crumbling, and it wasn't my fault. It was theirs. They'd betrayed the principles that made them great. And once you betray your foundation, your fall is only a matter of time. In early March, Titan Ridge announced the Apex Survival System to the world. We held a massive launch event not in some sterile expo center, but at a remote mountain lodge, reachable only by snowcat or snowshoe. Savannah's idea: if they want to see survival gear, she'd said, make them survive to see it. Journalists, influencers, gear experts, they all trudged through ice and wind to get there. When they arrived, they found real-world demos. Apex tents weathering 60 miles per hour winds without a ripple. Apex jackets keeping wearers warm in sub-zero temperatures without adding weight. Apex boots gripping sheer frozen cliffs without slipping once. And every piece bore the same signature. Designed by Evan Maddox. The media coverage was euphoric. The Apex system redefines modular survival gear. Titan Ridge crushes old paradigms and old giants. Is Summitage finished? That last headline made me pause, because I knew the answer. Yes, they were finished. They just didn't know it yet. 2 weeks later, Savannah called an emergency team meeting. I walked into the boardroom to find her already standing at the head of the table, arms crossed, face unreadable. On the screen behind her, a confidential memo leaked from Summitage's internal communications. A last gasp. They were attempting a reorganization, a desperate pivot toward urban adventure gear, a shameless attempt to court casual consumers and distance themselves from the outdoor disaster. No modular systems, no survival focus, no future. Savannah looked round the room. "This," she said, voice calm but deadly, "is what failure looks like. Remember it." She turned her gaze to me, softer now. "And this," she said, "is why you never compromise what you believe in." That evening, after the meeting broke up, I drove out into the mountains alone. Not for business, not for press, just for myself. I climbed to a rocky ridge under a heavy winter moon and unrolled one of the Apex tents. The cold bit deep, but the tent held firm, the modular systems snapping together effortlessly even with gloved hands. I slid inside, zipped it closed, and lay there listening to the wind battering against the world outside. Safe, warm, home. The gear had worked, the dream had survived, and so had I. Spring thawed the mountains slowly. By April, rumors of Summitage's final collapse were no longer whispers, they were front-page news. Industry sites ran brutal headlines. Summitage files for bankruptcy protection amid lawsuits, falling sales. Outdoor giant falls to newcomers after innovation missteps. Titan Ridge, once underdog, now industry leader. The fall was faster and harder than anyone had predicted. Suppliers pulled contracts. Retailers canceled partnerships. Former executives scrambled to distance themselves, issuing bland apologies and vague new opportunity statements on LinkedIn. But it was too late. Summitage wasn't just bleeding money anymore. They had lost the trust of the people who mattered most, the ones who counted on their gear. When it meant life or death, there's no recovering from that. I wasn't surprised when, one morning in early May, a sleek black envelope arrived at Titan Ridge's offices, addressed to me. Inside, a formal letter from the liquidators managing Summitage's dissolution. Polite, clinical language asking if Titan Ridge would be interested in acquiring certain intellectual properties and production equipment at auction. At the bottom, a hand-scrawled note. You won. P.H. Peter, the man who had once fought beside me in silent meetings, who had salvaged my old sketchbooks from the ruins. I smiled faintly, setting the letter aside without responding. We didn't need their ghosts. We were building the future. By June, Titan Ridge's stock valuation had doubled. The Apex Survival system was on backorder for months, a logistical miracle and a nightmare at once. Savannah promoted me again, this time to Chief Innovation Officer, with full oversight of all Titan Ridge product lines. It was more than a title. It was a trust, a promise that creative IT, real creative IT, would never be sacrificed for short-term fads again. I spent my days mentoring young designers, taking them into the field, teaching them the hard lessons no classroom covered. Design from need, I told them, not from trends. Solve problems first. Beauty will follow. Just as my grandfather had taught me so many years ago in that dusty Crestwood cabin. 6 months after Summitage's final bankruptcy announcement, I returned to the mountains again. Same trail, same weather-beaten ridge where I'd stood the day the Summit series launched. Only this time, I wasn't burdened by anger or fear or revenge. Just clarity. The wind tore at my jacket, the Apex prototype, but I stood firm, breathing deep the cold, sharp air. Somewhere far below, in the valleys, companies rose and fell, boards shuffled, executives like pawns. Trends came and went. But up here, only truth endured. Either your work mattered or it didn't. Either you built something real or you vanished with the next storm. Summitage had forgotten that. Titan Ridge never would, and neither would I. As the sun burned its way up over the horizon, I took out a notebook, leather-bound, worn, like the ones I'd filled so many years ago, and began sketching. Not because I had to, because I still wanted to. Ideas poured out effortlessly. A modular alpine shelter designed for polar conditions. An adaptive harness system for glacier crossings. A fully integrated expedition toolkit, lighter and more reliable than anything yet on the market. None of it done to chase sales charts or social media trends. Just pure function, pure form. The way real design had always been meant to be. When I finished, I closed the notebook, tucked it into my pack, and shouldered it with a satisfying snap. Down below, the world waited. Competitors scrambling, distributors watching, customers, real ones, relying on us. And me. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. I was leading. The best revenge wasn't in destroying Summitage. It wasn't in the headlines, the royalty checks, the stock charts. It was this, standing here, free, focused, unbreakable. As I started back down the trail, snow crunching under my boots, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Savannah, ready to talk about next year's launch schedule. I smiled, typed back simply, always, and then I disappeared into the rising sun, one step ahead of the storm, exactly where I was meant to be. The end.